Is marriage a bad idea? The divorce rate is high, and getting divorced can be utterly devastating. The worst thing that can happen to you, emotionally and financially traumatic. But is marriage in general a bad idea? On the surface, it would seem so. Anybody would be foolish to try something with such a high failure rate and with such devastating costs of failure. So it would seem logical to see marriage as a bad deal and avoid it at all costs, right? Maybe, maybe not. Let's explore this topic in a little bit more detail. In Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, he explained what happened to the French after World War I, before World War II. For the French, World War I was absolutely devastating. Men came home from the war utterly obliterated. As Sowell explained, this shifted how the French thought about war. Before, it was a deliberate, rational act, something that you did with purpose, something you avoided if you could by doing deliberate things, something that was discussed openly and rationally. But after the horrors of World War I, this changed how they thought about and how they talked about war in general. It became this kind of abstract thing that was bad. It wasn't something you were actively and deliberately involved in. It was something that just kind of happened, something to be shunned and avoided at all costs. And according to Sowell, both an historian and economist, this is what led Hitler to easily take over France during World War II. Even though invading France was Hitler's biggest worry, the French folded like a cheap suit. Why? They didn't see war as something to actively participate in. It was more seen as this vague thing that you just hoped wouldn't happen to you. Now, what the heck does this have to do with marriage? Many men today see marriage in the same way. This very vague, very bad thing that only exists in the abstract. Some nefarious thing that will destroy you and is to be avoided at all costs. But is this the correct response? Sure, this is one response to the high divorce rate, that marriage is dangerous. But another response to the same statistic, the same high divorce rate, is that maybe today people just suck at maintaining relationships. From a purely statistical standpoint, you could look at the people that don't get divorced and see what they are doing, and then compare them to the people that do get divorced and see what they are doing. It would seem pretty straightforward that if you wanted to get married and stay married, there's plenty of data that will help you figure out how to do that. Figure out what the non-divorcers are doing and do that. Figure out what the divorcers are doing and don't do that. In the book, The Millionaire Next Door, the author studied many millionaires to see what kind of habits led to becoming a millionaire. And guess what? One key factor was their choice of spouse. Notice that key word, choice. Maybe that's why many marriages fail today. People don't choose well. They choose people for the wrong reasons. They choose people who make them feel good rather than people that are a more logical choice based on what they want to achieve in their lives. A recent study indicates that less than 10% of adults who lose a significant amount of weight keep the weight off for more than a year. This means that weight loss has a 90% failure rate, way higher than divorce. Does this mean it would be logical to avoid weight loss because it has such a high failure rate? What about high school kids who send their college applications to Ivy League schools? They have a notoriously high failure rate. Does that mean high school kids should avoid sending in their applications because it has such a high failure rate? It's also kind of curious that people want to avoid marriage because marriage has such a high failure rate. But the dating and romantic relationships that can lead to marriage have a much higher failure rate. Imagine if you had a 50% success rate when asking girls for their phone number. How about this idea? It's not a nice idea, and you may get mad at me because of this, but so what? Are people in a relationship about ready to get married? They have a guy or a girl lined up, but then they see the divorce stats and then they decide not to get married? Or do people have no options whatsoever and they use the high divorce rate as an excuse to not get in the game in the first place? Sure, plenty of people are active in the dating game and see marriage as not being in the cards for them. It's always a personal choice. There's that word again, choice. Maybe the question could be, if you knew you had a high probability of getting married and staying married, would you choose to get married? Or do you see marriage and whether or not it lasts as something that is completely out of your control, that you have no control whatsoever over the quality of your relationship? Or is it possible in your mind to have a highly refined list of criteria for your potential marriage partner? Is it possible in your mind to actively manage your relationship and your marriage to ensure a high probability that it doesn't collapse? Or do you believe it is completely outside of your sphere of influence, that you and your potential marriage is like the French and war before World War II, that you feel your marriage and whether or not it lasts is completely out of your control? It is absolutely correct that relationships and marriage are not what they used to be. The dating world is fraught with uncertainty and danger. There are far more opportunity costs than there were just a decade or two ago. But marriage still is a possibility. People still get married and people still stay married. Yes, the costs of finding a suitable partner and maintaining the relationship so the marriage doesn't collapse are higher than ever these days. But then again, the cost of everything is higher than ever these days. Ultimately, it boils down to your mindset. Are marriage and relationships things that are completely out of your control and too dangerous to even think about? Or are marriage and relationships things with associated costs? And if so, are you willing to pay those costs? The question is up to you to decide. And important questions like this are best made individually and not under the influence of social proof or the hive mind or red pill gurus on the internet. After all, this is your life, and as risky as it can be, a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage can make your life much, much better. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. To learn more, please visit mindpersuasion.com.